Hi, thank you for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan and this is We the Govern. Today's story we're going to discuss about what happens when law enforcement officials, elected politicians, and bureaucrats collude together to conceal wrongdoing and to hide the truth from the public. This is a crazy story about one guy who's willing to push back and get to the truth.
They're not government records, they're public records. They're our records, and that's what we were looking for. That's why we took it to the Supreme Court, because the decision didn't make sense. This was entirely a situation that the county had created purposely to conceal and tie the hands of public records requesters, and we thought that was wrong.
Kilduff versus San Juan County is going to be an authoritative case that's going to be cited to by courts in the future and in briefings to those courts.
Today we're going to go to San Juan County in Washington State. San Juan County is one of the smaller counties, and it consists entirely of a group of islands in North Puget Sound. And the only way to get to these islands is to take a ferry, take a boat, take an airplane, or if you're an incredibly good swimmer. They're beautiful and they're very picturesque, known for orca whales and for the beautiful scenery that you have there. They're also completely politically controlled by the Democratic Party. In fact, it's one of the most left-leaning counties in all of Washington State based on how they vote. And we're going to this county today to talk about a story of political corruption and collusion and an effort to conceal the truth from the public, and how one citizen was willing to get involved and engaged and push back to expose the truth.
My name is Ed Kilduff. I'm a geologist here in Washington State, hydro and engineering geologist. I live on Lopez Island. I've owned property on Lopez for about 20 years. I became interested in local government because I saw some odd things happening with my neighbors, land use things, and things happening about topics that I knew, that I worked in, areas about geology and the environment and wetlands. I became friends with the code enforcement officer here, somebody who used to be the code enforcement officer. And he was telling me about a situation involving a local councilman that was pretty strange. And it was a situation where a piece of property that was next to a councilman's home was thought to be a wetland by a potential purchaser. And that potential purchaser backed out of the sale, and somebody else bought the property. And despite the fact that it was a potential wetland, it began to be developed. And this was interesting to the code enforcement officer because he wasn't aware of any reports or anything that had sort of made the site a non-wetland. And he began investigating why development was taking place on that piece of property. It led him to find out that the county manager, Mike Thomas, had essentially done a favor for one of the councilman's friends, and taken this piece of property which had a county identified wetland on it and determined that it wasn't a wetland. And there were all these mysterious notes in the database in the county about per JT, and so my friend investigated this and essentially found that the county executive's wife, Jennifer Thomas, had, without a report, without anything else, because of her purported expertise in this area, had basically said there wasn't a wetland, and with that the county manager had removed it and kind of fixed the situation for the friend of the councilman. And my friend, the code enforcement officer, was upset about this because anybody else in the county who had been caught in this situation would have been caught in massive amounts of red tape. And with a wink and a nod, and by knowing people behind the scenes, everything was made right for this friend of the councilman. And my code enforcement officer friend was upset that there wasn't equal treatment, and so that started the whole dispute and controversy between my friend, the code enforcement officer, and his superiors, and the county council and the prosecuting attorney. The investigation that my friend had done was sort of deemed to be not really his official responsibilities, and they wanted him to take all the information and everything else that he had found out and remove it from the official file. He refused to do that. And eventually, after refusing that, he filed a whistleblower complaint about this situation. This was kind of going on simultaneously, and he refused to sanitize the file. And when he refused to sanitize the file, and he had turned down his boss and his boss's boss, and the county prosecuting attorney, Randy Gaylord, came and told him to sanitize the file, and he still refused to do it. The prosecuting attorney himself took the file to remove the offensive information that they didn't want to have in the file anymore. My friend came to me and said, request the whole file. I think they're going to destroy it. Request the whole file. It's improper governmental action. They're going to take all this investigation material that I put together and have it removed. So I requested the file. There was a conspiracy on the part of the county manager, maybe council members, to assist a council member's friend and then conceal the assistance that friend was given, when anybody else would have been caught up in kind of a meat grinder of red tape and everything else. So there was really two things: sort of the insider network working for a friend of an insider, and then the concealment of that. And that's what my friend Chris Laws objected to, and that's why he got in so much trouble with his superiors. But he had documented in this file, and I filed a public records request in 2015 to get the entire file to try to shed some light on this entire process. And the county wouldn't produce the records, and after about a year of trying to wait for them to produce the records, I filed a lawsuit. And at the same time, the county had put in a set of procedures for obtaining public records, procedures which were tied the hands of public records requesters, and the county wanted you to exhaust these procedures before you could sue. And they also had this strange situation where a county councilman was acting as the public records officer, which was an oddity in and of itself.
My name is Nick Power, and I practice public records law throughout the state of Washington. And Ed Kilduff came to me with an interesting problem, that he was having problems getting records that he asked for from the county. And in Washington, we have a great public records law, at least in theory we do. And in practice, it sometimes turns out to be very much a different case. And what we learned in this case is that many municipalities are enacting their own mini laws, which are acting to prevent requesters from being able to access these public records case, and that's exactly what happened here. Mr. Kilduff filed suit in Skagit County, and he sued the county saying, I asked for these records and they didn't give them to me. So over the next 9 months, we had hearings in Skagit County where we brought witnesses in, and they testified as to whether or not these records were provided. And at the end of all that, the judge decided that we were improperly before the court because of San Juan County's own county code. And what San Juan County had done is it had enacted an ordinance which limited whether or not you could file a Public Records Act in case. And it limited this by requiring requesters to go back to the county prosecutor and say, hey, we think you missed something, and could you please give us our records? And so essentially to ask a second time.
The trial court said that I had to exhaust the county's administrative records procedure before I could sue. And that would have essentially required me to get a final determination from Randy Gaylord, the very person who sanitized the code enforcement file. I would have had to get a final determination from him about my request before I could sue Randy Gaylord in the county.
So let's talk about the cast of characters, the elected officials, and the bureaucrats that Ed Kilduff, in this case, had to try to navigate through and fight through in order to just get to the truth. To start out with, you had San Juan County prosecuting attorney Randy Gaylord. He has been fossilized in office for over 20 years. Supposedly, this is the guy who's supposed to enforce the law and ensure that the law is followed in San Juan County. But instead, he happens to be the person who directs employees of the county to break the law. When those employees refuse to break the law, he gets them fired, and then he goes and actually breaks the law himself. And in this case, he did this by deciding to take those records and conceal them from the public personally. And this is unusual and not typical. You had former council member Bob Jarman, whose friend wanted to buy this piece of property and who intervened with the bureaucracy, apparently, to make it smooth sailing for his friend so he could get a special deal on this land and have the wetlands wiped out, even though everyone else in the county gets harassed and harangued and fined and pressured by all kinds of very onerous and restrictive land use laws. You had current council member Jamie Stevens, who in this weird sort of way was wearing this double hat where he was also somehow the public records officer, whose apparently primary job was to conceal records and prevent the public from actually getting them. You had county manager Mike Thomas, who colluded with these elected officials to try to make sure that people who were insiders and who were friends of those elected officials could get special deals on their property while everyone else gets basically screwed up by their red tape. And in addition, his wife, who he used as the consultant to come out and make these wetlands just vanish for the friend of the council member. And finally, you had Skagit County Judge Stiles, who unfortunately decided that in this case, when somebody wanted to actually get to the bottom of this after a year of trying to go through the public records process, who decided that he would punish, and this is unusual, he wanted to punish the person who dared to request these records with a $10,000 fine, almost in a way to intimidate others so that nobody else would dare question government and try to get to the bottom of what was actually going on. And this is the cast of characters that Ed Kilduff had to fight through in order to get to the bottom of what was actually going on and get to the truth in San Juan County.
In Washington law, it's clear now that if there is a denial of records, you have an immediate right to go and file in Superior Court.
That's why we took it to the Supreme Court, because the decision didn't make sense. This was entirely a situation that the county had created purposely to conceal and tie the hands of public records requesters, and we thought that was wrong. I mean, look at all the things I went up against. I went up against a county prosecutor who I alleged was sanitizing the file, who I also had to get his permission from, so to speak, under his procedures in order to sue them. I went up against the county council. This was something where the county manager was helping the friend of the county councilman. My friend, the code enforcement officer, had lost his job. So, I mean, the odds against us were pretty high. And what's really nice is the Supreme Court saw through all that. We got a 9-0 opinion at the Supreme Court. There wasn't even any dissenting opinion, or it was just all 9 justices seeing this for what it was, that the county can't put in administrative procedures which tie the hands of requesters. And they saw my effort as a good faith effort to fix the system. And so that's a tremendous victory, and it's a tremendous victory for everybody in Washington, because not only for the obvious reasons, but because these procedures that San Juan County had adopted were beginning to be adopted everywhere else. And so this was going to affect every requester in the state eventually. And we put a stop to that.
Yeah, we are gratified with the outcome, and we're gratified that we won not only a decision, but a unanimous decision at the Supreme Court. Kilduff versus San Juan County is going to be an authoritative case that's going to be cited to by courts in the future and in briefings to those courts. So we're happy about that.
You know, at trial court, the judge fined me $10,000 and said I hadn't used the county's administrative procedures. And this was widely reported in the press here in San Juan County twice. And I just felt the entire system was sort of bent on sort of shaming anybody who would even begin to question the county's procedures. It was meant to chill public records and public records requesters and to intimidate them. At least that's the impression that I got. And so I'm glad we were able to withstand that kind of criticism, and that I had attorneys who saw the merits of this case and the importance of this case, even if other people didn't.
One of the interesting aspects of the argument at the Supreme Court was that the county was supported by Amici, and the Amici was the Association of Washington Cities. They actually cited in their amicus brief that many municipalities, and it lists them, have actually adopted and copycatted San Juan's ordinance. And a lot of these cities now, of course, are going to have to go back and rethink things because those ordinances are now illegal pursuant to what the Supreme Court said in Mr. Kilduff's case.
I mean, the role of the prosecuting attorney here, Randy Gaylord, is is hard to believe, because the very person who segregated the file and sanitized it is the very person who is supposed to enforce the law here in San Juan County. And he's the very person who, under the county's procedures, is the person you're supposed to go to for relief from obstructions to the public records. And he's supposed to be the person you go to for a final determination before you can sue. So the county prosecuting attorney, Randy Gaylord, had set himself up in such a uniquely powerful position where he saw everything, he could make decisions on everything. So he was omniscient and omnipotent, and he could grant or squash anything he wanted at any time. And that's essentially the essence of the county procedure that they wanted followed. And we were able to defeat that. The Public Records Act, and what we were looking for, is public records. They're not government records that the county prosecuting attorney or the councilman or the county manager owns, so to speak. They're not government records, they're public records. They're our records, and that's what we were looking for. We wanted access to our records.
In the end, Ed Kilduff was able to prevail. Despite the odds, despite the collusion between the elected officials and the bureaucracy, despite the corruption, and despite the fact that he was ridiculed and attacked and fined by this judge in Skagit County, despite all those obstacles, he was able to prevail. Ed's primary motive was to get to the truth, to expose the truth for the rest of us to know what's going on. With the work that Ed's been able to do, with his willingness to persevere, we can get to the truth. We can expose the truth and hopefully prevent future bad behavior like this from happening in local government. The people of Washington State owe Ed Kilduff a debt of gratitude for his willingness to persevere and get to the truth. Once again, thank you for watching. This is We the Governed. If you want to learn more, go to wethegoverned.com. Go to some of the source links that are listed below. Feel free to comment, feel free to share and subscribe, and until next time.